All right. Welcome to another episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And we want to give a big welcome back to William Irwin. He's a professor of philosophy at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and is best known for originating the philosophy and popular culture book genre with Seinfeld and Philosophy, a book about everything and nothing in 1999, and the Simpsons and Philosophy, The Doe of Homer in 2001. William's latest books are Little Siddhartha and God is a Question, Not an Answer. And his newest book out now is called Both and. Welcome, William.
Thanks for having me, Alan and Leon. It's a pleasure always to talk with you guys.
Thanks for coming back.
And we have to also mention this. So Bill Irwin was our first ever podcast guest in May of 2019, which is like so crazy to even think about. You know, we kind of look at the whatever I don't know. I was going to say studio. I don't know if this is a studio, but like, you know, we kind of look at the background and I'm like, wow, man. I remember when we sat here with the
coming from no camera or really bad camera equipment. No mics like these.
Right.
No lighting.
Yeah, we had an echo that nobody could freaking resolve.
Skype, and then having errors and technical difficulties and all that. So,
yeah. So, nice. Bill, you knew that, right? You were our first guest.
Now that you say it, it rings true. I was also the first guest on someone else's podcast that never took off, so I can't take any credit for it. You guys have been great, and the profile of your guests has gone up since we started, and I'm glad that you'll have me back. So good job.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's like super nostalgic to have you back, man. It's like I remember the first time we didn't even see each other because of the way our camera equipment was set up.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So poetry and philosophy, right? So kind of in terms of, I guess the question here would be, when you think of philosophy and when you think about poetry, they seem to be, you know, pretty antithetical to one another, right? You would think of them as kind of like dichotomous or in a sort of state of dichotomous existence. So, all right, tell us, Bill, tell us about your background. How you became interested in poetry?
Yeah. So it is kind of an ancient rivalry. And they don't always get along, but I think that's unfortunate. Lots of things and sides that don't get along, they really should. And I might have gotten interested in philosophy even through poetry because I was interested in poetry back in high school when I was going through my my existential crisis. And that's continued my existential crisis, but it was pretty bad at that time. So I was looking for ideas and worldviews, and literature and poetry were particularly good at exposing me to those. And I sort of maybe found my way to philosophy and ideas from poetry. And I tried my hand at writing some poetry back in high school, as lots of people do, mostly on the pages of notebooks, and sharing it with a guidance counselor who was very helpful to me, as I know, Leon in particular is helpful to so many people that he deals with. And I wonder if any of them write poetry and show you poetry, Leon. I know it was therapeutic for me, even if it wasn't very good poetry. And I always wanted to do it, but I didn't write poetry that looked anything like what you read in the textbooks. And I don't know. In college, I found my way to philosophy, and I'd say I flirted with psychology and married philosophy, and it's been pretty good since. But I've always had an itch to get back to writing poetry, and I was fortunate to have a sabbatical that roughly coincided with the pandemic, and I didn't have a big philosophical project that I was trying to get to, and so I thought I'm going to treat myself and try my hand at writing poetry, and I'll try my hand at writing poetry that's philosophical, and that's what I've done one way or another. Whether it's good or successful is another matter, but that was my goal. That poetry and philosophy don't need to be these separate things, and so the title of the book is Both and that plays on the idea that what I've written is both philosophy and poetry, and it gives me a nice out. If you think it's bad poetry, I can say it's good philosophy. If you think it's bad philosophy, I can say, well, it's good poetry. Maybe it's neither nor, but I like to think that it's both and. So that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll be honest, having read the book recently, certain stanzas stood out to me. And definitely, like, for example, I here I have the book right here. And let's see, I just had it here. So for example, there's a section called On Success.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and then there's this part about, so this one little stanza here, the moment, clock can't tell you what time it is, right? Like, for example, even that in itself is very philosophical, right? Because the moment, the now, right? It's not something that something external can teach you. It's something that you have to sort of feel and be with, right? There was that, or this other little stanza here that got me, truth hunt, find where people are right even when they're wrong. So sort of like like seeking first to understand, then to be understood, like certain things like that. Or, and I'll just say one more because I know I could just,
you can read the book.
So habit's hammer, final strike, sunder stone, lightning gone, thunder alone. Like that hit me. Like, it also sounds epic. It just sounds cool to read, and I get it. Like it's something you keep doing. There's a consistency to habit, and that's how it correlates or goes with success. And like things like that, like struck a chord in me while reading. You know? So
and you know,
I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, it's validating. You know, you write poetry more alone than you do most things. I mean, like you guys doing this podcast as a team. Lots of what I do is as part of a team. And the way I was looking at it as I was writing it is, I'm not a photographer, and maybe I'm wrong about the way the photographers work. But I get the impression they take lots and lots of photographs, and not all of them are ones that hit the mark and do what they want them to do. But if you get something out of some of them, that's pretty good. So my idea was I don't have to have a huge success rate with these poems. They're all very short, as Alan demonstrated in reading them. And if it doesn't strike you, or if you don't like it, you didn't spend a lot of time on it. You move on to the next one. And you know, if out of a short book of poetry, you come away with a couple of images and ideas, and maybe even turns of phrase that stick with you, then to me that's a success. So it's really cool to hear Alan latch on to some of those. Those were some favorites of mine as well. And the images come from other things, right? I mean, that idea of habit's hammer, right? And the idea that sometimes you have to do something repeatedly and you feel like you're getting absolutely nowhere with it. And then the final strike that actually breaks the stone, right? And that gets you through to whatever it is that you were trying to achieve with the development of the habit. You don't see any of that work. You don't see it, getting anywhere when you're striking a stone repeatedly. But all of that work really paid off in that one final strike. It wasn't that one final strike that broke the rock. It was everything that you did leading up to it. And I'm glad too that you latched in on the one about the moment, right? Because it sort of fits with the title of your podcast, Seize the Moment, right? And what the moment is not something that a clock can tell you, right? It can tell you clock time, but there has to be an intuitive feel that you develop for when is the right time to move on a certain idea or project or whatever it may be, and that's not the clock time. And as you said as well, even what a moment is more of a philosophical question than it is something that a clock tells us. So thank you.
Of course. Oh, thank you. No, because reading stuff like this that resonates with you and makes you think, it's nice. Not a lot of not a lot of books, or I mean, books do this, but I don't know. It's strange. I just found myself thinking more, as especially in the beginning of the book, the first section. It's on concepts in philosophy or specific philosophers. Like, for example, I saw things about Plato and Socrates in there, different stanzas in there, and sort of um, a poem or a stanza about kind of like what they spoke about, and like a different spin on what they spoke about in a poem format, which is interesting. It starts to make you think of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, even to get into it a little bit, to take it into like an academic, I guess, I don't know, what to put it into an academic framework. What's so interesting is that when we think about philosophy, we always have like this sort of argument, this like perpetual struggle or battle between continental philosophy and analytic philosophy. So you'd have like the continental philosophers who are more into aphorisms, right? They're very poetic. Like, let's say Nietzsche, right? He'll have like these kind of sayings that when you hear them, right, they're striking, right? Just like with the poetry for you. And you'll think of them and you'll think, wow, man, like this is something I could carry with me, right? You know, if I'm having a difficult time, I could think of some sort of like truism or aphorism. But then, you know, when you go into analytical philosophy, you have like these really big volumes, right? Sort of like, because they're so precise and they're looking for truths, and they're not only just looking for truths. Like, let's say, you know, there's definitely some truth in like Nietzsche's aphorisms, but the point is they're looking for precise truths and they're looking for nuance, right? Obviously something we cover on this show. So what's so interesting, and I mean, I want to hear about it also from your perspective too, Alan, but you know, kind of obviously going back to Bill, is that why do you think that this kind of like struggle developed? Like, why can't we have both? Like, why can't we have your poetry and these aphorisms, right, that kind of are striking and that you can carry with you on a day to day, and that you can kind of use as reminders because they're quick, and you know, it's easy to remember, obviously. And then you can also have like these long tomes where they obviously tell you like these deeper, more nuanced truths. Like, why does there have to be a kind of I guess, why does it have to be dichotomous?
Why can't we all get along? I
Yeah,
don't
right.
know. I mean, that's precisely it. I mean, and the analytic continental divide has always struck me the wrong way, because I'm really attracted to sort of big idea, insight. But I mean, I have a real appreciation for argument and clarity and brevity, which is not a hallmark of most continental philosophy. Even Nietzsche's aphorisms are embedded in long books, usually, right? So yeah, why not both and? And I think that philosophy as an academic discipline is really heading in that direction. The distinction isn't quite as stark as it was 20 years ago, but right. So why not both and?
Right, because, and going back to you, right, I know like you love stuff like this, right? Like when you love like motivational stuff that you could just like kind of think of on the fly. If let's say you wake up in the morning and you need something to get through the day, you're obviously not going to pick up a, you know, Hegel or whatever, some big book to kind of read through, right? You're going to pick up something like this.
No, I'm very partial to Hegelian dialectic. I'm just kidding. I just thought that was interesting how you're like, you're not going to pick up Hegel. I'm like, okay. Well, the thing is, I'm very partial to poetry.
Yeah.
To me, poetry is like music. You can have a sort of a subjective sort of interpretation of poetry, or when you write poetry, there are things that you can say that have several different meanings. And it's a very sort of creative outlet to express yourself and also to sort of interpret. Like, that's what I like about poetry. You can always take maybe 5 different angles on what is the poet here trying to convey. And it's interesting because for me, it becomes like not like a thought experiment, but like a little game, trying to figure out what did the author mean. And then simultaneously, I'm wrestling with what they're trying to convey. And it makes me think too. So it's kind of fun,
right.
like that. Also certain concepts, maybe, you know, because again, you get stuck in the automaticity of life sometimes. You forget certain things that are obvious, or not obvious, but it's how should I put this, like back to the moment, right? Maybe for some reason I haven't thought about that recently. I know about it and I just haven't revisited that. And I'm reading this book and it's putting me back in that sort of headspace.
Right.
And I like that, because it's poetry, again, there's that wrestling with what's being conveyed, so it makes it like fun to think about. Instead of you're being told something,
Right.
there's an extra element, an extra layer of thinking about what's being conveyed.
Right.
Although you can argue that that's what you do anyway if you're reading and trying to understand what you're reading, but that's my feeling, at least, to answer your question.
Right. Yeah. And even just thinking about it, like in terms of my work, obviously psychologically, people tend to hate like platitudes, right? So if you go see a therapist and, they say something like, well, like this is not a poem, obviously, but let's say they say something, well, you can't love anybody else until you love yourself, right? So that's a platitude. Another one could be something like, well, kind of a physical well-being is, based on spiritual or emotional well-being. And people hate that stuff, right? So, but the thing is like, right. But the thing is, but again, going back into the analytical territory, I wonder why can't the two get into it or can like exist together? Because if you kind of think about it, right, in some way those sort of platitudes are true, right, to like a great extent. So I think maybe the problem is that like when we're talking about like the divide is that people sort of leave it in terms of these aphorisms, right, where they'll give you like Nietzsche, what doesn't kill you make you stronger, okay, bye, right, and they kind of leave it there instead of like helping you kind of develop that idea further and saying like, okay, but how do we know that, right? How do I know that any of this is true? You're just telling me something like that some other therapist or psychiatrist or philosopher would have told me. Mm-hmm. So what I love about this, Bill, is that it seems like you kind of molded the two together, where you took these, these sort of like aphorisms and platitudes, but you found the kind of middle ground, I think, between, let's say poetry and philosophy, where you kind of melded or molded the two together, and you could kind of, let me see. So it's like, this one is a tough one to explain. They kind of help you take it to that point, right? It's like, it's not, even though it's not like an aphorism in the sense that the purpose of it is to make you think, where, I guess it's the point of an aphorism too, but I guess the distinction there is that aphorisms seem more like directives, whereas like your poetry and obviously, kind of the words in the book, it seems like they're more so like thought experiments. Would you kind of characterize it as that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that description, and coming out of what Alan had said as well, there's sort of the writer's intention, and then there's a meta intention, right? So part of what I would call the meta intention is to wake up the reader, or maybe that sounds too grandiose, but just to key the reader or to provoke the reader to how does this apply to me, right? How do I understand this, and how does it apply to me, if it does, right? And so the idea is hopefully to sort of generate an insight, right? Kind of a quick realization, because when like what Leon was saying, the problem with platitudes is if you've heard them before, they don't do anything for you, right? The first time that you hear any platitude, it's profound. And the reason it's a platitude and sticks around is because it does harbor some truth and some profundity to it. So some of what I do in the poetry is taking some phrases that may have been heard before and twisting them in a different way, or hopefully in some cases coming up with a new turn or phrase that's just meant to generate an insight that you might not get in reading a long and winding argument. That doesn't always, that has certainly its place and its importance, but it doesn't deliver the goods as quickly as sometimes we need it. Sometimes you need a quick espresso, instead of whatever the long and winding beverage equivalent of that is. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say that, because I had this feeling. I wouldn't quite describe it as this, but it was kind of like reading some of the stanzas felt like reading Zen koans.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were points when
by the way, that's his other book.
I know. I'm aware. And it felt like how should I say this? Like my mind stopped. It was like kind of like what's the sound of one hand clapping, right? And then all of a sudden, that depending how you interpret that, usually your mind sort of stops. But the insight is like that you kind of pay attention to silence. So that's actually one interpretation. Somebody else might say something different about that. But yeah, I had that feeling. Like there are points I would just stop after reading some of the stanzas here. And it's interesting. Like that you did that on purpose. It seems.
Yeah, I mean, if it happened once or twice, that's great. I succeeded, right? I mean, that gets back to my analogy to photographs. I don't expect that every the poems are very short, just to tell the listener. A couple of lines, 2, 3, 4 lines at a time. And so you had mentioned like Zen koans. I mean, some of them are quite as short as that. And it's influenced by Taoism and by haiku, although it doesn't follow any kind of necessary syllable structure the way that haiku does. And yeah, my hope is that it causes a pause and consideration, although different ones may strike different readers, and that's part of the interesting thing. It's part of the interesting thing with what you guys do with this podcast. You give it your all every time that you record it, and you don't really know which podcast is going to generate lots of listens and responses and that kind of thing, right? It's a bit of a mystery and experiment what's going to stick, and even the ones that don't generate a lot of response or comment, as this one might not, are still worth doing. And that's kind of how I felt about the poetry. I enjoyed doing it for myself, and the hope was that at least some of it could strike a chord with some people. So I can consider it a tremendous success if it struck a chord with more than one person.
Okay. I have to talk to you about this. So Alan and I have this debate all the time about like what really matters. So I'm on the other end, right? I'm like, no, we need to get the clicks, we need to get the views.
We need results.
Yeah, we need results, right? I'm really results oriented, because for me, I'm like, no, if we don't get the results, it doesn't matter, right? Very black and white. Alan in his mind says kind of like, he gives me your perspective, right? He tells me, no. He's like, the effort and the journey itself is worth it, right? So hold on, wait. Can I just ask Bill? Okay. So Bill, how do you get to that point? Because I still can't figure out how I could get to the point where the results aren't the only thing that matter.
Okay. With a lot of pain and suffering. That's how you get to the point, right? I mean, really, and it is tempting, because I told myself in writing the book, I had sort of a mantra that I had developed for myself that was going to kind of persuade me to do this, to take the chance and to do the writing. And I set the bar of success very low, that I was going to consider this a success if it were published, and I didn't have to pay somebody to publish it, and if somebody outside of my own house liked it. So to me, that makes this a real success. Now that it's been published, of course, I feel like, well, I didn't have to pay for it to be published. I'd like to sell a bunch of copies so that the publisher feels like they got a good deal in publishing it, and they don't end up in the hole, and maybe they want to work with me again, right? So it's tempting. What was simply fulfilling for the sake of its own doing then becomes, well, maybe there is some other criterion to judge it by. But I can tell you that in the writing and in the process, more so than anything else I've ever done, I've considered it a success, simply because I enjoyed doing it. And that's kind of a meta success, because I feel successful in having adopted that attitude about success.
Right.
And it, like I said, it only came at the end of a lot of pain and suffering, with lots of other work that I've done where quite clearly it had to be judged a success based on how well received it was, how many copies sold, that kind of thing. I'm hoping I'm more and more at the point in life where I don't have to feel like I want to judge success that way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Right. I mean, there's a, how should I put this? There's a different sort of quality that you operate from, or a difference. So imagine that you were dependent on success. You need this outcome to occur. Right. I need this to happen. in order to feel okay, or in order for this to feel like it's successful. Then that found it, you're acting from a place, like whatever you're creating has a sort of filter or a layer over it of that sort of, if you want to describe it as energy, that sort, it's just coloring your actions.
Right.
But I imagine, and I feel this way some percentage of the time. I'm not perfect with this, but I try as much as possible to remove those filters and just sort of operate from a place of like, is this helping anyone? Does this do anything for anyone? If this helps even one person, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
If hopefully this causes some kind of a ripple effect, and I'll have some faith on that, and that just makes me feel like good. If I'm concentrating on, oh, I need money, or I need this to make money, I need this to do this and that, I feel like I wouldn't be operating as authentically as I would, trying to legitimately help somebody. So yeah. But I think your perspective has a lot of value too, because if you want to get something to a lot of different people, you want to market it a certain way, or you need to understand how certain things work in order to get it to those people, then it can't be all about the integrity of operating authentically, or maybe it's authentic to try to learn marketing, right? Maybe I'm
well, it's definitely authentic to me.
Yeah. Right. So there you go.
Yeah. And I guess
when you guys describe it that way too, it makes me think about, a lot of people really don't like poetry because they've had bad experiences with it in school, and I don't know what the hell this means, and this is this old flowery stuff, etc.
And so, I'm one of them.
Yeah, sure. But Leon, you love song lyrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where poetry really comes in for most people, I think, because they get it outside of works of poetry, like in song lyrics. And so as you guys were doing the sort of yin-yang of success there, right? And I want to say both ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think about what it means for a band or a musical artist to do things on their own terms, right? And yes, they want to have success, right? But they want to do it on their own terms, right? The ones we're most likely to really admire and appreciate, that kind of thing. And of course, the temptation is always there, though, that once they have done it on their own terms and succeeded, that they like the success too much. And so then they end up selling out or tailoring what they do to more of a mass audience rather than to the fans who initially were there with them, appreciating what they did very authentically. So if nobody's listening and you're a musical artist, that's no good. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to end up doing what you do in a way that is not true to your original vision either.
Yeah. Right. And I think a great example of that is the band Rainbow. So I'm not really sure how many listeners of ours would actually know them, because they existed a long time ago. Right. So just to kind of give everybody a background. So the band Rainbow was founded by Ritchie Blackmore of Deep Purple. And so obviously Ritchie Blackmore is a legendary guitarist, right? He's pretty much a Hall of Famer, right? One of the best guitarists literally in history. So Ritchie Blackmore brought in Ronnie James Dio, right? So obviously you have this great combination. And so they told great stories, right? So Stargazer, literally about so Bill knows, right? So Stargazer literally about this guy who's what was the story about? It was some mythical tale where he was essentially trying to climb up some sort of magical mountain or whatever it was to get up to see this some sort of mythical creature. I don't remember exactly who it was. Damn, that kind of sucks that I forgot. But whatever. But the point is so a lot of Rainbow songs were like this, right? So essentially with Dio, what he writes about is these magical kind of themes where it's about the hero's journey, and eventually the hero kind of learns something from it, and then he comes back, a la Joseph Campbell. And so finally they had this moment in the band where, you know, Richie Blackmore was like, yo, I don't want to do this anymore. So even though they were selling really well in Europe, they were like super popular in Germany and I think the UK, they weren't doing anything in America. And so essentially Richie Blackmore was like, yo, I want to like scrap the whole kind of idea. And I think he brought in Graham Bonnet at the time. So he wanted to scrap the idea. He's like, I want to do something that's more kind of pop and mainstream. And Ronnie didn't like that. Ronnie was like, I'm not doing that. That's not who I am. And so they tried to get Ronnie to to record the song Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow. And so it's like this, like, you know, poppy kind of like love ballad. And he's like, I'm not doing that. That's just not who I am. And then so I guess Blackmore was like, yeah, forget it. If you don't want to do it, I'll go bring in somebody else. Even though they still never recorded the song. Like there's a live version with Graham Bonnet, but never recorded. But so it was so interesting because you took this band, right, that had such great substance. Because if you had, so the thing is, like, first of all, Dio could write songs on his own. He doesn't need Richie Blackmore. But the thing is, the fact that like they had like this combination of like great minds writing music together, it was amazing, right? Even though obviously not so appreciated in the US. But then, man, honestly, and look, I love Rainbow and all of its kind of formations. But the thing is, you could tell during the later years with Graham Bonnet and Joe Lynn Turner and even Dougie White, it wasn't the same, man. It just wasn't the same. Like it was pure pop, right? They would write like love songs like Street of Dreams, Since You've Been Gone. And look, Since You've Been Gone is still used on commercials, right? You see it on the Honda commercial or whatever, right? And then look, I guess Richie got what he wanted, right? In that sense, because he got the popularity. But I guess, you know, I want to hear both of your perspectives on this. I guess, is it worth sacrificing authenticity for popularity? What do you think, Bill?
Oh, I would say certainly not, right? And it's usually counterproductive. Yeah, and that, I mean that's a fine example with Rainbow. I mean, you know, there are any number of bands that we can look at, and some of them have succeeded when they've turned in a popular direction, and some have not. I mean, the whole we could do a whole podcast on Rainbow and what happened. I mean, Richie Blackmore, oddly enough, as you know, Leon, is like doing medieval music or something now, right? He's totally doing this obscure stuff, really, only
Right.
because he values it and he won't do anything else. So he went totally in the other direction. I don't know if he learned a lesson or what, but anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's so great is that, like with Ronnie, obviously he became popular with his own sound. So like he kept, so Ronnie from Dio and Ronnie from Rainbow is literally the same all throughout. You honestly, if you didn't know like who the other bandmates were, you probably wouldn't even be able to tell the difference like between the different bands. If you listen to like, let's say like Stargazer, right? You'd be like, oh, that sounds like something on the Dio album.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, authenticity that's the answer for me.
Yeah.
Right. I value though, see, I try to understand somebody's perspective who's operating from, oh, I'd like this to be more poppy, or I'd like to reach more people, or something like that. I could get it. And also a lot of those people tend to be very, like Leon, like very results oriented. Right. And it doesn't mean that you can't be authentic and results oriented too. So obviously that's why I like being in a team, because I think somebody contributes, you know, the emergent that comes from us working together is good. Maybe we balance each other out, for example. It doesn't work like that in every team or partnership or something like that. But I think that's good. I don't think somebody has to be enlightened all the time.
Right.
You know, maybe you go
Practical too.
I mean, you could be, I mean, practicality, I'm sure you could still be operating from an authentic place and be practical.
Right.
But I don't know. There's probably something I feel like I have a blind spot, for example, even if I think I'm being authentic and I'm not trying to get these results and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe there's just something I have a blind spot to that's also valuable, that I'm just not in alignment with, and I could learn from. Right. So that's how I take it. But otherwise, yeah, I'd like to operate from an authentic space. I feel people respond to authenticity as well, and you feel better. I feel good when I know that I'm not doing anything that's foreign to me in terms of intentions. So I don't know.
Yeah. And that's what I loved so much about Dio's autobiography, where it's like it literally was this journey, kind of much like his music, obviously. And it went from, kind of like these roots, right? They were just like, just this regular kid from upstate New York. And then essentially he always stayed true to his voice, man. Like the guy always stayed true to what he wanted to do. He never like, quote unquote sold out. And then you have this pinnacle at the end of the book where he finally makes it to Madison Square Garden in 1986, literally on his own terms. So I know Bill.
Do you know what I had? I have a story connected with that very show. I mean, maybe we're going too far off topic, but the book, Dio's memoir, ends with his show at Madison Square Garden. I was supposed to go to that show, and a friend of mine and I went to the Garden to buy the tickets on the day that they went on sale. Right. And we got conned from a guy who was a scalper, who wasn't even a scalper. He was just he just conned us. He took our money, and we didn't get tickets.
Wow.
So I learned a lesson. It wasn't on the day of the show. This was months before, but we had a lot of money, especially for young kids. That was what, 86, so I would have been 16 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a couple $100, I think, that we got taken for, because we were buying tickets for a bunch of friends, and ended up conned. But I guess I wasn't supposed to be at that show. I had seen him on the it was probably the same tour. I think that was the Sacred Heart tour. I had seen him a couple of months earlier, back in the fall, when he had played Nassau Coliseum. But anyway, to kind of link in with the other discussion about authenticity and such, one of the things that I kind of like is when you take something that's not at all popular and try to popularize it, because I think that then what you're sort of doing is against the grain and is authentic. There's a kind of faux authenticity, I think, or authenticity, if in philosophy that just tries to be obscure for the sake of being obscure, or overly rigorous for the sake of being impenetrable. I see plenty of that in the academic world. And so you had kindly mentioned in the introduction that I had sort of first gotten a break by these philosophy and pop culture genre of books, and I got a lot of flack for that when I first did it, from people in the academic setting, that I was cheapening.
Oh God!
Oh yeah, lots of it. Occasionally I still do, but not as much anymore. But that I was cheapening philosophy, and philosophy is meant to be rigorous, and it's really not supposed to be for everybody. And
wow!
But I loved getting the flack on a certain level. But to me, that was the idea that, if you can take something that is too often obscure and make a presentable version, or not a presentable version, but a more accessible version of it, then good on you. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this poetry book too, is that not everybody may like or appreciate or fully grasp or understand every poem in there, but it's no knock on the reader's intellect if they don't get it. It's not like you're not a poetry aficionado, you're not a member of the club, you're not smart enough or anything like that. You just might not like it, or might not think it says anything valuable. It's a knock on me, the poet in that case, and not on you, the reader. And I think too much poetry has been locked away in inaccessible forms and language for too long, and I think people have a yearning for poetry, and they'll find it in other places. If you don't give them poetry that's accessible, they'll find it in lyrics, where rightly it is, and in other places. And one of the people I took inspiration with or from with this is the poet Rupi Kaur. I don't know if you guys know.
Yes, absolutely. I actually thought of her when I was reading your book.
Yeah. And she's gotten a lot of flack as, oh, she's a terrible poet, she's a hack, all those things. From people who would, she's sold millions and millions of books. and listen, the poet, not all of her poetry, I think, is all good. Not all of it speaks to me, but some of it does. And if I go through a whole book of hers, and one or two poems speak to me, that's great. For some people, every poem of hers speaks to them. I mean, she has a particular audience, it seems, to speak more to women and younger women whose experience she resonates with, rather than a middle-aged guy like me. Great, fantastic, good on poetry, good on her, if I don't think she did anything inauthentic, for sure. It's totally authentic. She wasn't trying to be a sellout or whatever. Not everybody could write poetry the way that she does and have it be authentic. And she gets a lot of undeserved guff for what she's done. So the success and the authenticity can go hand in hand, and they don't have to. I have no delusions that I'm going to have Rupi Kaur success with this book, and I thankfully I didn't set that as my my bar or the level that I would have to. Talking with you guys right now and having it published is has met my bar of success.
Well, I love that. And, just to give a quick shout out to our guy, Michael Shermer. Shermer always says the same, well, something very similar, not exactly the same thing, where he'll say, look, there's no sort of dichotomy between being a good writer and writing clearly and then being an academic, right? He's like, the two go hand in hand. So he'll say something like, well, I don't understand, why kind of like, in not maybe in pop culture, no, I'm wrong. In academia, people would say, well, you can either have one or the other, right? You can have like, popular fiction, popular nonfiction, or you can have like these academic tomes. He's like, no, it doesn't work that way. He's like popular because, he has like a great podcast and he has like all of these different guests on who write for the public. And he's like, yeah. It's not that they dumb down the material. He's like, this is the material. They just write in a clear way. That's how academics are supposed to write. So I guess I wonder, from your perspective, Bill, do you feel like maybe there's like a threat or a sense of a threat from a lot of academics who maybe don't write so clearly and there's a bit of a jealousy there?
First off, love Michael Shermer. Good for you. You guys have had him on, right?
Yeah, we had him on in April.
Told you, you've way outclassed having me as your first guest on Michael Shermer. I mean, there is some of that. There is some sort of sour grapes that this is something. I mean, to be fair to my fellow academics, we're trained to write in a way that is not accessible. And there comes along with that a certain snobbery, at least for some people, that people, there's only a small handful of people who can understand what I'm writing and saying and that kind of thing. But I mean, Shermer is of course right, and he typically does have guests on his podcast who meet that bar of clarity and having something valuable to say as well. I mean, Steven Pinker is probably the hallmark of that, and he's written books about the nature of writing as well. So both and. Let's go back to that. You can have both and. So why not try for it?
Yeah, but again, going back to that sense of threat, it does really seem like they feel like, if we're sort of in this field and we're, the experts, right? Like, why are we getting the public involved, right? Like, why do other people get to be experts too?
Yeah, there is a lingering residue of that. I think, there's less than there was 20 years ago, going back further than that. I think people see more and more the value. There's more and more value, particularly in philosophy, recognition of what it's, to me, a sort of an odd name, public philosophy. To me, all philosophy should be, if you're not saying something that the public could appreciate why you're saying it, and for the most part, if you're not writing in a way that someone in the educated public could read, you're not writing it well, I don't think. And if you're not saying something that you couldn't at least explain, to even the non-educated public in a way that they could, appreciate, then I'm really not sure what you're doing. I mean, there probably are exceptions to what I'm saying that it could easily be refuted with, but for the most part, philosophy and really other fields of study as well should be the kind of thing that can be presented to the public. Public philosophy should be sort of an oxymoron. It started with Socrates out in the streets doing it in public. That's what it should fundamentally be.
Yeah, we had a philosopher on. Her name is Ashley Borer, and so she had a great conception of what it actually means to, like, philosophize in academic jargon. So she's like, look, man, academic jargon and, like, philosophical jargon, essentially, it's a shorthand, right? So it's a shorthand of communicating with fellow philosophers, and that makes a ton of sense, right? Because, like, when you're in a conference or whatever, you just want to kind of expend as much or as little energy as possible, right? That's the point. But if you're writing for people, right? If you want to write for a general audience, why would you use jargon? Or at the very least, why would you not explain it? I mean, unless obviously you want to, like, put yourself up, and this is my words, not hers. So unless you want to put yourself up on some pedestal and make it seem as though obviously, like, you have like some esoteric knowledge that other people aren't worthy of.
Yeah.
Well, people these days, right? They still do read Plato, Socrates, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and so on, Sartre, and they still do. But I think it's important to come out with new works to try to distill. Maybe actually, sometimes you have new insights as well.
Right.
Sometimes you integrate different philosophies and come out with a different sort of an emergent, and you want to convey that also to the public. So, I mean, I think it's important to constantly be coming out with new works, even if certain things have been expressed before, and in that sort of academic jargony sort of way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's valuable. I mean, I think in terms of, for example, somebody having an unbreakable philosophy, or, like, for example, I know, like, we had him on the guest, not Maximilian, I'm sorry, Pigliucci.
Oh, Massimo.
I'm so sorry. That's apologies to Massimo. All right. So, for example, he values Stoic philosophy, and I've seen him get into arguments over it, and sort of, and I think it's great to get really into it and then try to argue one philosophy against another philosophy. It does come back to both and 100%.
Right.
That's how I feel. But there's probably a value to arguing these different philosophies and trying to get at the core of what makes the place you're coming from so valuable, and then you start to maybe you add something there, and it's interesting, from that academic jargony sort of perspective. But again, you want to convey this to people so this way they understand and they get the insights. So yeah, that's
right.
The most important.
And it's like, we want to make, I think, philosophy important. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Sky Cleary, who's coming out with the book on Simone de Beauvoir called How to Be Authentic. And so what she does, which I really appreciated in the book, is, so Simone de Beauvoir's philosophy tends to be a little bit obscure and it's not that easy to understand. So what she does is she not only puts it, like, in layman's terms, which is really great and what you want, but she takes modern examples. So she'll take stuff from pop culture, like obviously, Bill, you kind of focus on, and then she'll use personal examples. And so obviously Simone de Beauvoir did this as well. But the point is, when you're reading the kind of philosophical tome, you're looking at it and you're thinking, wow, like, this can actually apply to my life, and I could kind of see how, because this makes sense to me. And so my thinking is, I don't know, I think everybody should do that. I think every philosopher who's writing books should write it with the intent of it being distributed to a general public, because going back to the idea that I mentioned, just now, it should be important. Like, it should matter to people. I don't know. I guess, why would you just want to write for other philosophers? Most of the time, they won't even read your stuff.
Yeah. It's a lot harder than it sounds, right? I mean, people may have the wrong opinion that if you're writing for a broader audience, it's easier writing, but in many ways it's more difficult, because you really have to think from outside of what you already know. It's the kind of curse of knowledge, where if you're an expert in something, it's very difficult to get back to sort of beginner's mind and realize what the proper phrasing is to get that across. And there's also just the problem of wordiness that we see in the academic world. And it's not only in the academic world. That people just sort of write and say much more than actually needs to be said or written to get their point across. And I very much like a sort of spare aesthetic, which is what I tried to strike with the poetry, and it sort of mimics some elements of Taoism and Zen there, with just trying to use as few words as possible to hint at an idea. I'd rather say too little than say too much, oftentimes, and particularly in poetry, right? I mean, that's the exasperation some people have with a poem, right, where it goes on in some flowery language, and the point was a rather simple point, and I mean, it's the classic students complaint. Well, why didn't he just say that? Right. I mean, and that's not a valid criticism of certain particularly great works of poetry. If you're reading a Shakespearean sonnet and you get to the end and you say, why didn't he just say that? Well, you missed the point too, because it's the beauty of the language, etc. But we're not all Shakespeare, and we shouldn't all try to be, right? Or Yeats or Wordsworth or whoever else, right? So we should write in the way that's natural to us. And for me, what I value in other writers and speakers, and what I try to do in my own writing is to say as little as possible, to put a point across the point in as few words and as suggestive words as I can. And then hopefully, particularly in the case of the poetry, it has the effect that we're discussing with Alan in particular, that it strikes something, it causes you to pause and think about it for yourself, and hopefully maybe try to apply it for yourself.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned Yeats. Actually, that back to sort of the beginning of the convo when we were talking about the hammer striking for the habit stanza. That reminded me of Yeats. It's not, wait, sorry. Don't strike while the iron is hot. Make the iron hot by striking. Something like that. Yeah. And so kind of, like it's very Yeats. I mean, I don't want to, I don't know if you take that as a compliment. Is that good?
Oh, well, how could I
Okay.
not?
I love that. I love that question. What an insult.
Yeah. No, it's good. So yeah, it's
your regular Shakespeare, Bill.
Yeats. Oh my God.
It reminded me. No joke. The hammer strike. It just reminded me of that quote while I was reading. So,
yeah, and I really love that. Right. So I like that. So that's what I meant by when I said like your book is sort of like a thought experiment. So not obviously like a philosophical thought experiment, but in the way that you're like it's sort of, what would you call it? Like a catapult, right? Your book is like a catapult. So which a lot of times in philosophy you get the answers, right? So again, if you're reading like a 300, 400 page book, right, you'll eventually come across the answer somewhere down the line, obviously, right? So here it's not like that. These are more like riddles, right? So in the sense of when I say thought experiment, I mean there's like the jumping off point where now you get to kind of think about these things that honestly, how many of us really on a day-to-day start thinking about, like, literally, why am I chasing success? Maybe some of the other themes that you have, which unfortunately don't come to mind right now.
About people, about different philosophies, about success,
right?
About death towards
propaganda. That was another one that you focused on, right? Like the things that we believe in, obviously, in terms of like fake news, right? So the idea there is that like we kind of go through the day to day and we don't think about these things, and oftentimes like we don't want to read like long books about them, right? I mean, it is what it is. It sucks, but it's true. Yeah. So, and it's like when you read a kind of book of poetry about it, right, it starts to at least get you to pull back and think, okay, you know what, maybe this is actually something I should be considering more than I already am.
Yeah, well, I mean, people love inspirational calendars with quote a day kind of thing. Right. I mean, maybe that's what I should do. Make this into a maybe I'd sell some that way. What I do with these actually though is I tweet them. I've tweeted the whole book, and each day I tweet out a couple of all the poems actually fit in a tweet. They weren't written to be that way necessarily, but that's the way it all works out. And yeah, I mean, I'm not breaking the internet, right, with people liking and retweeting them, but it feels like I'm throwing something out there into the world, and occasionally I get a like or a retweet on that, and uh, you could read them one at a time, two or three at a time. Keep a copy in the bathroom, whatever,
Mhm.
whatever. And if it provokes a thought, I mean, I love and appreciate the image of the catapult that you use, right? I mean, it's really meant to provoke a thought, really more so than give you an answer.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what I appreciated about it. So again, going back to those large philosophical tomes, which are great, right? I'm certainly not against them, but the idea is like sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you actually want to kind of try to think for yourself and to sort of reason for yourself and to come to a conclusion on your own. And I think that these sort of riddle-like poems, they help you get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate
Honestly, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For me, also, you know what I love about this? It was, so here's the book, for anyone who's watching right now. And yeah, it was an easy read too, in terms of like how long it took me to read it.
Mhm.
And this is gonna sound maybe dumb. Besides the value, well, that's the main thing. The main thing is the value I got from the book. It's great. What I liked was the fact that I finished reading it so quickly. I felt accomplished.
Mhm.
Does that make any sense?
And
Yeah,
of course.
Is that
people love short chapters
Yeah.
and books and things
Mhm.
because yeah, you can read that whole book in half an hour and have
Yeah.
done a fine job of reading it. And if I've had some measure of success with it, maybe there are half a dozen poems in there that you'll mark and maybe want to look at again, right? I mean that's the way
Yeah.
I look at it. Yeah, so many books that I have piled up. I'm never going to get through, unfortunately, and so I abandoned lots of books. I've given myself permission to do that at a certain point in life where life's too short to read a book
Yeah.
that is a slog for me.
Yeah.
And if I've accomplished nothing else with this, I haven't wasted people's time because you can get through the whole thing in about half an hour, and maybe you want to look at some of them again, or maybe you don't, and hopefully you feel like it was worthwhile.
Well, I love that.
Absolutely.
And that's a pretty great point to end it off on. So Alan, final questions for Bill before we go?
Oh yeah. So if we wanted to follow your work, and also
Buy the books.
yeah, and also I wanted to ask where we could find the book and buy the book too.
Yeah, well, I mean, the book is on Amazon and other online retailers. I don't think you're going to find it piled at the front of your local Barnes and Noble, but who knows? Maybe with the rupee cower someday I got it. Yeah, but online retailers are probably your best bet for it. And thanks for that. And yeah, I'm
Yeah.
on Twitter at William Irwin 38, and I'm on Facebook, and love to connect with people. And would love to hear from anybody who takes a look at the book. You can find my email address easily enough as well. It's right on my webpage, which you'll find if you just Google William Irwin at King's College in Pennsylvania. It's my webpage through the college, and love to hear from people.
Absolutely. Thank you
awesome.
so much for coming on, Bill.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thanks for having me again, guys. It's been great.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Okay,
Take
thanks.
care.
Take care, guys.
All right. You too, man.
All right.
Yep.
First of all, that was awesome.
Yeah, super fun.
Hell yeah. And guys, if you want to follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Like, subscribe.
Hit the bell.
That's right. And buy the book. And guys, thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.